Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men number 58, cover dated November 1996. The cover caption, "It had to happen, Gambit versus Magneto." This has been building for the last few issues after the truce between these guys that developed during the Onslaught saga. They now have come to blows. And the artist behind this particular cover image, Anthony Winn there, and Miki on inks, and Liquid or Christian Lichtner on computer colors. So you're having artists there coming over from Image, once again in the mid to late 90s after the bursting of the comics speculator bubble and the comics industry getting into trouble in terms of sales numbers. You have these young artists, talented artists coming over to Marvel seeking more secure work. So the cover image itself, it's not too bad. The coloring a little bit dark on this particular cover, but it's okay. Let's get into the issue itself. It opens with a splash page there. You can see the artist, the interior artist, is not Anthony Winn. It is actually Bernard Chang, an artist who remains active in the industry to this day. And the story opens with Storm in the Morlock tunnels on the anniversary of the Morlock massacre. So let's get past the splash page there. So here she is, and she's talking to herself in true comic book convention. "Why, Wind Rider?" she asks herself rhetorically. "Why do you come back here every year on this night of nights, the anniversary of the Morlock massacre? Is it to honor those who died, or could it be that you are seeking penance?" So we've got some editorial notes there to the issues in question, all the way back in 1986, issues 211 to 213 of Uncanny X-Men and 9 and 10 of X-Factor. But she spies a lit candle in the Morlock tunnel. "With barely a thought," says the third-person narration, she commands the stale air in the confined space to rise as the wind and carry her aloft. And she continues talking to herself, saying, there are more candles, each spaced about 10 meters apart for as far as I can see, but who would be down here?" And it's very interesting in terms of who it turns out to be. So she's flying away and wondering about different things in terms of the timing and also what's been going on with the X-Men and her life with the X-Men. "My life seems to have become little more than one surprise after the next." Well, there's a big surprise coming. And you see her thinking to herself, exclaiming in her thoughts by the bright lady in terms of who it is inside there. Let's turn the page. Can you guess who it might be? Well, it's Gambit. So the title of the story is Testament, and the creative team, Scott Lobdell. Very interesting there, Ralph Macchio credited with the story. So my guess there is that Lobdell is the plotter and Ralph Macchio is providing the script. Bernard Chang on guest pencils, and as I said, like Chang has gone on to have a long career in the industry. I looked him up. He was a graduate of the Pratt Institute in New York, and he got gigs around this time from Marvel. He did some penciling work on Cable. He penciled the first Deadpool Daredevil crossover. I have that special in my collection somewhere in 1997. So he did a bit of work for Marvel, and then he's mainly worked for DC. He's a talented artist, quite a distinctive style, but in the area of the Joe Madureira, Ed McGuinness, and Terry Dodson type style, more cartoony than realistic. So we're getting into the wake of the height of Jim Lee's influence on comics artists of the early 90s and moving on to a different kind of artistic style. John Holdredge on inks, Richard Starkings and Comic Craft on digital letters, and Joe Rosas on the colors. And interesting here too, 1996 was the year that Mark Gruenwald died. Mark Gruenwald was an editor and writer at Marvel Comics, but he was most particularly associated with having encyclopedic knowledge of every Marvel comic that had ever been published, from Fantastic Four #1 all the way up to when he died. So he was the guy that Marvel creators went to if they had questions about continuity And, post Mark Gruenwald's death, one could say that Marvel never had the same concern with continuity as it did until 1996, with the likes of Mark Gruenwald being the guardian of that continuity. So Storm here sees Gambit, and he's kneeling down in front of one of these grave markers, and she thinks to herself, this is where all those who died during the massacre were placed to rest. What is Gambit doing here? So readers would be asking that themselves. And, like in the Onslaught saga, it was revealed that the X-Trader was not Gambit, but rather it was Professor X himself, ironically. And so there remains that question, what has Gambit to feel guilty about? It's been established he feels guilty about a dark secret in his past. So we're getting hints here in the build-up to Uncanny X-Men 350, which reveals exactly what the dark secret is. So Gambit, alert to the fact that he's got a visitor in the grave chamber. And so as he casts his kinetically charged playing cards towards that visitor, he says, for the record, it was the shifting of the candle's flame that gave you away. But he doesn't know that it's Storm, so he's surprised. Sorry, Stormy, wasn't expecting nobody down here, least of all you. But why not? Because, of course, Storm was the leader of the Morlocks at the time of the Morlock massacre. So she says to him, Remy, this is the Morlock burial chamber. As their leader, I will always bear some responsibility for their deaths. Never is that feeling more acute than on this evening each year. That is why I've come in memory, in atonement, she says. But you were not an X-Man at the time. You did not even know about this community. Why then, my friend, are you here? And that's a very opposite question. And he responds rather hesitantly. He pauses. I read about it in the computer files when we were trying to put them back together after Xavier left. I just felt badly, that's all. I just came to pay my respects. He's being disingenuous, as it will turn out. Notice stylistically the really thick black outline on Storm's face there. That is very distinctive of a style that's emerging in this period. We've seen Joe Madureira do it in recent issues of Uncanny X-Men. Now we have Bernard Chang doing it. We'll get Terry Dodson doing it as well. He's already done it in the Storm miniseries. So it's this new stylistic trope that's coming from manga, and that becomes a staple of American superhero comics going forward. And again, it's moving away from the center of the Jim Lee influence going back to 1990, let's say, and that lasted for a good 5 years. But that's changing. That paradigm is shifting. So Storm here, borderless panel. I always say it. It's a way to always vary your layouts, to have one panel without a border every few pages. It's always visually interesting, striking with the white background. Yes, and she says, yes, I pause C. So she doesn't quite believe him. I like the body language that Bernard Chang has given her here, where she's kind of holding her arm defensively. It's a defensive body language gesture. It kind of reveals that she doesn't believe him. Remy, would you excuse me? She says, although there was ultimately nothing I could have done to save the Morlocks from slaughter, I've always felt ultimately responsible for their tragic fate. So her phrasing there is ironic. She doesn't quite know why, but readers will discover why. And we see Remy, we see Gambit here fading into the shadows. Her last words echo softly in his ears, ultimately responsible. They linger, evoking thoughts the Cajun X-Man would rather not dwell upon just now. And then, and this is a bit cliched, like a thief in the night, he's gone. So as I said, this is all prologue for me, and preparing the way for the revelation of Uncanny X-Men 350, which had been a long time coming. So the scene switches to New Jersey and the CBNC studios, and we've got the Beast's girlfriend. They've reconciled recently. Trish Tilby, they reconciled in the previous issue of X-Men, and she is conducting an interview with presidential candidate Graydon Creed. And one of Graydon Creed's team is his personal assistant, who is Drake Roberts, but is really Robert Drake, Iceman. And Creed goes out for his interview with Trish Tilby. And Tilby hits him with a whopper of a first question. She says, "Good evening, Mr. Creed. Quite a reception you've received here." And he says, "The public's catching on to what we've been saying, despite the vicious attacks of the liberal media." And she responds and says, "You're referring, I assume, to newspaper headlines such as this." So this is J. Jonah Jameson's Daily Bugle, which is connecting Graydon Creed with mutant hatred. And he responds nonchalantly, "Look, another open border panel here." Precisely. It's obvious. J. Jonah Jameson and his Daily Bugle are attempting to sway public opinion with distortion and outright lies. And this from the man who's turned Spider-Man bashing into a cottage industry. So Iceman there, this isn't Iceman, Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, is also another covert agent that Cyclops has placed in Graydon Creed's team in order to keep an eye on the presidential candidate. And so he's watching from the wings as well. And then Tilby goes for the jugular somewhat. She says, "So then you'd argue with Jameson's characterization of you as a hate monger?" And Graydon Creed replies, "I'd like to think of myself more as a champion for people who would otherwise not have the power to defend themselves. My job upon election would be to negate the threat mutants, those genetic misfits, pose to normal American citizens." And now there's a bit of a surprise coming in Lobdell's plot. A call back to all the character development he's done on Iceman over the previous couple of years, including Bobby's contentious relationship with his father, who has been established to be a bigot himself when it comes to mutants, but seems to have turned over a new leaf. So he asks from the audience there, who's next? This is Iceman's father. "You finish negating mutants, then who do you start on? Anybody else? That's different. Anyone else you consider is a problem, a threat?" And he continues and says, "While you're at it, why don't you get rid of the elderly, cut off welfare mothers, or stop medical treatment to the sick and dying? Those mutants you want to get rid of, they're somebody's sons or daughters, someone's family, but that means nothing to you so long as you win your precious election. They're people, and you have to treat them like people." So this an unexpected development in terms of the father-son relationship between Iceman and his father, and he thinks to himself there with a smile on his face, "Who'd have thunk it? After giving me so much grief over my life as an X-Man, Pop goes and sticks up for mutants. Thanks, Dad." So, but then the scene switches, and we're at the Xavier Institute, and Rogue is there, sleeping, and on TV there's a kind of very cliched romantic movie on, where the guy is saying, "I want to get close to you, but I'm afraid of the consequences." And the woman says, "It doesn't matter, we were made for each other. Sometimes you just have to let nature take its course." So, of course, Rogue can't touch anyone. The man kisses the woman, or vice versa. And, you know, that's kind of what she wants, but can't have because of her mutant power. And somebody's outside her window, and it's Joseph. Okay, so we've got the love triangle that's been set up now by Lobdell between Gambit, Joseph, and Rogue. And Rogue thinks to herself here, "We told him about his rotten past, so he's trying real hard to make up for it. Maybe too hard. Waking this gal out of slumberland ain't winning him any medals." So Joseph tells her he must come to the sub-basement because he believes he's got a way around her, a way around the fact that she can't touch anyone. And this is interesting because in the Age of Apocalypse, Lobdell wrote Magneto and Rogue as being married and having a child together because Magneto was able to use his powers in order to negate Rogue's. So we're getting Joseph figuring that out in the prime reality, and the prospect that maybe what happened in the Age of Apocalypse could happen in the prime reality, and Rogue and Magneto get married and have children. So Rogue is intrigued and confused. She says, "I don't know what you're playing at, Joseph, but I'll come. Now just go back on outside and give a girl a chance to get dressed." Okay, so let's continue with the story. Outside in the night, we've got Bishop and we've got Wolverine. Wolverine looking less feral there than other artists depict him in this era. and he's having a heart-to-heart with Bishop, and Bishop is kind of like floundering. He's lost his purpose because, as he says here, when I came back to this era, I thought I could prevent the future of mutant persecution from coming into being. Now the traitor's been discovered and defeated, and it turned out to be the one person I've always looked up to, Charles Xavier. Now I'm stuck in this time period with no purpose, no goal. So, what is Bishop going to do with himself? Well, he's an X-Man, but what else does he have in his life? So Wolverine tells him, listen to me, Bishop, you don't have to do anything, you just have to be. If you think your life's over because a big question got answered, think again. You don't have to go back to the future to have one. You got the same thing to work with the rest of us have today. So Logan, always very pragmatic, very realistic in terms of his present-minded attitude to life. He's always in the present moment, and that's what he is advising Bishop to do too. And there in the background we've got Gambit, and Gambit is walking over to the side of the house, and of course, what does he see? And the two lads see that Gambit has ignored them. He sees Joseph hanging out outside of Rogue's bedroom window. So Gambit attacks him with his kinetically charged cards, and he accuses him. You tell me, Joseph or Magneto or Eric Lensher, what name you going by today? And what are you doing outside Rogue's window? So now we get the fight that we had on the cover. This is a pretty nice page here, 3 big vertical panels, and we've got the 2 figures breaking the border of the panels there as well. Interesting looking stuff. And of course Joseph tries to explain. He says to Gambit, I'm trying to help Rogue. There may be a way to temporarily negate her powers. And of course Gambit steps in there because he wasn't able to kiss her without having his mind and memories absorbed by Rogue, which caused the tension between them and their kind of quasi breakup. So Gambit interrupts Joseph, and he says, look, Rogue been down that route before, and it brought her nothing but heartache. Ain't gonna let you get the femmes hopes up just to disappoint her. And Joseph now stops being Mr. Nice Guy, and he says, and he makes a good point too, from what I understand, Gambit, you are her biggest disappointment by far. That really is, like not putting a fine point on it. And Gambit responds with a left hook to Joseph's jaw. And we can see, this is kind of interesting. We see the blood splattering out of his mouth and getting all over Bishop and Logan here as well. So it's all over Bishop's shirt. But Logan tells Bishop, don't get in the way of these two guys. Let them settle it their way. So now we're going to get this fight continuing between them. Joseph is saying, let's do the fight with no powers. So they tussle. Joseph gets a nice boot in here, kicking Gambit in the face, and Gambit then breaks the rules by charging up his cards, throwing them at Joseph, and Joseph then says, okay, well, if we're using our powers, he pulls the sprinklers up out of the grass and grabs Gambit with them. Now yield, he says, or I'll title the sprinkler hoses enough to crush you. So there we are. They're at stalemate because Gambit is ready to fire those cards at Joseph's head and blow his head off. So what's going to happen here? Wolverine is holding Bishop back from getting involved. So the lady that they're fighting over comes out of her room, and she alights on the ground, and she asks them, you want to tell me what you're all fighting over? Gambit, what have you got to say? So they beg her pardon there, and then she says, all I see are a couple of grown men wrestling around like 2 bear cubs, and that don't do nothing for me, she says. Took me a long time to be comfortable knowing I don't need to belong to nobody. In fact, I like it that way. So the 2 lads here blaming each other like 16-year-olds. She's not impressed, and she flies off. And now the 2 lads kind of commiserate with each other. Sure was embarrassing, says Gambit. How you feeling, Joseph? I'll live. Good left, by the way. So they're united in being rejected by Rogue for the moment, but the love triangle goes on. And now we're at the last couple of pages of the issue, and this is intriguing stuff here. We're looking in on Manhattan again, the apartment of Daily Bugle publisher J. Jonah Jameson and his wife Marla. So he's up late and he's continuing investigating Graydon Creed's background, and he's looking for information, slamming the phone down there, and he's saying to his wife, "I'm sorry, Marla, but I'm determined to find the missing pieces to Graydon Creed's past and show him for the charlatan he is." And look, she's wearing a Pratt Institute shirt. And remember what I said, Bernard Chang, a graduate of the Pratt Institute. So working in a little Easter egg there in relation to his alma mater. And Marla says to her husband, "Try not to get worked up over it, Jonah. Creed will be there when you get to the paper in the morning. Now let's get some sleep." And Jonah, happy with his wife's suggestion. "Sometimes I think I'd put myself into an early grave if you weren't here. But outside, queue outside, there's somebody watching from the top of this apartment building. There are some things you're better off not knowing, Jameson, believe me," says the figure in silhouette. "You keep this up and soon, bang bang, you'll cry havoc." So Havoc, once again in the history of Alex Summers, he's turned to the dark side and he is here now. The implication is he's prepared to assassinate J. Jonah Jameson should he get too close to the truth regarding Graydon Creed. And it's all to be continued in Uncanny X-Men 339, which will guest star Spider-Man. So there you go. And letters here regarding issue 54 of X-Men, the one that revealed that Professor X is Onslaught. Next month, Cyclops assumes the mantle. Quicksilver confronts Joseph, and Cannonball comes face to face with Creed. There we are, some advertisements in the back, and an advertisement for the new art team on X-Men, Roger Cruz and Bud LaRosa. That's a pretty nice image there of X-Men by both of those artists, penciler and inker. I do hope that you enjoyed my review and commentary on X-Men number 58. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comment section to the video. If you enjoyed my review, please like the video on YouTube and share it. Also, really helps the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.